You are listening to a unique and special production of the 110-250 Audio Studio.
What's this, a daybird? A young bird? Who's the bird? Where is he?
Hello, Billy Jerome. Do you know that I can see you on the telephone? But I still...
Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino series in conjunction with the 110-250 Audio Studio with Band Mate Jon Sweetwood of the former Kansas City power pop band, the Daybirds. As a part of a larger mission to capture the essence, history, and bravado of the late 90s, early 2000s band, we get into quite a bit. From his current home base of Las Vegas, Nevada, we get into how he started playing music, meeting the guys, evolving in the band, the rise, the other moments, and all of it as he remembers. Dig his perspective.
So let's start at the top here. When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Man, you know, I didn't know what the hell I wanted to be when I was a kid. You know what I mean? I was listless in that regard. I didn't have like some life objective that I was working toward, and I didn't always know this is what I wanted to be, which sucks because I was the kind of kid where everybody always told me you could be anything you want to be, which sounded awesome, except I didn't know what the hell that was. And so it wasn't like I was especially studious in school towards science because I wanted to be a such and such or whatever. I always knew I could be anything. I just never really knew what the hell that was going to be. And I guess in some ways I still don't.
So right now, for the sake of, and we'll get to this later on, you're in Las Vegas, but tell me where you're originally from.
I'm originally from Liberty, Missouri. I was born in Smithville Hospital back in 1976. And yeah, I was raised in Liberty, Missouri.
Prior to getting into instruments, you know, or even coinciding with it, talk to me about your early baptismal into music.
Well, I mean, from a standpoint of like music we listened to, I know when we were kids, my folks listened to a lot of stuff, and the stuff that stuck with me that they listened to was like the Commodores, Lionel Richie, Isaac Hayes, like shit like that was the stuff that really stood out. And I mean, you know, being of the age, they listened to like all the, you know, 50s doo-wop kind of shit that they liked. And then growing up on Liberty, you know, it's like everywhere you went, you heard, you know, George Jones, Loretta Lynn, Dolly Parton, all of that just seemed to be everywhere. Every time you walked into a store, every time you went to a friend's house. So for some reason, a lot of that old country always kind of stuck with me. You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't say that I ever called myself a quote-unquote fan of that stuff, but at the same time, I'll hear like a Merle Haggard song and be like, shit, I know every word of this song. You know what I mean? Like, through osmosis, it stuck with me, you know? And so those were sort of like my earliest, like, childhood age. Like, when I was a little, before I was buying my own music, that's the kind of music that really stuck with me.
On your journey as a musician, when did this begin? When did you start picking up an instrument? What was it, and how did it all happen?
Well, my brothers all played instruments, and so I mean there was always tons around us and all that kind of thing. I remember being, I want to say around high school age. For some reason, my folks had a piano in the basement, and there was a song by Harry Connick Jr. called Lofty's Roach Souffle. And I was like, I want to figure out how to play this. And it was like just a little instrumental melody ballad type of thing. And I was like, I want to do this. So like I sat down there and I was like listening to it and started playing it, and you know, listen, play, and then I figured out how to play that song on the piano. And in doing so, I was like, A, I like this. B, that really wasn't very hard for me to like listen to something and figure out how to play it. And that was kind of honestly where I started. That was the first thing I remember ever being like, I'm going to play this. And I did. I played saxophone in 6th grade band. I don't know if that truly counts, but you know what I'm saying? I never played an instrument like in school or anything after that.
Yeah, it's a part of the lexicon. So, you know, the one thing before you got on stage, you know, our early memories of all of that come from what we saw personally. What was the first live show that you ever saw?
Dude, the first live concert I saw was David Lee Roth, the Eat 'em and Smile tour. So that was like 1985, I think, 1985. at Sandstone.
Wow.
And Cinderella opened for them. And actually, fun fact, at that show, I remember I went with my buddy Jeremy Sila, and we were in 1985. I was in 5th grade, but I had skipped a grade, so I was only 9 years old. And I remember as we're pouring out of Sandstone, I am clutching on to like the back of his shirt or his dad's shirt or something like that for dear life. Granted, it was a big deal for my folks to actually let me go at 9 years old to go to Sandstone with, you know what I mean? And as we're walking out, I remember clear as day, this drunk lady comes up and she goes, "Is this my face?" and puts her hand in my face and shoves me to the ground. And I break connection with him and I lose him and my whole party in the throng of people flooding out of Sandstone. So I was like freaking out. I had found like a worker adult cop thing, and I had to go back to the little booth there, and they like called my mom and dad, who of course were flipping out. And so they are driving out. Meanwhile, like Jeremy's, people end up figuring out what happened, and they come back and find me. And so it ended in absolute chaos. So yeah, that's wild. And I think if it weren't for that, who knows? Shit, maybe I saw something before that, and I absolutely can't remember it. But that made that stick in my head like nothing.
Oh man, that's wild.
Yeah.
So before the Daybirds, you were, I believe, from my memory, you were an incarnation of the band called the Courthouse Project. Was that true? And was there anything before that, or was that your first band?
No, that was the first time, yeah. And, hell, I would barely call that a band. I mean, insofar as that we never, played shows, I don't think, or anything like that, or maybe we did once. But, yeah, that was basically me and Dean and, Jimmy Gabriel, Jeff Molinex. We would just sit around and jam, and then we ended up going up to the courthouse steps in Liberty, because at night, that was kind of vacant. There was a power outlet on one of the lampposts there. So we would plug in my keyboard into that, and we would jam at the courthouse steps, and people liked it, and more people would come around and hang out with us and whatever. But yeah, that was the first time. That was in that era right after I'd left high school, where, this, again, like I said, I didn't know what the hell I wanted to be. So it wasn't like I was driven to do a bunch of other shit. So we would hang out and jam.
So you got the taste of being in a band with that. So take that feeling of what it was like to be in a band and then merge that with how did you meet the guys in the Daybirds? How did that begin?
Well, Dean I had met working at Liberty Hills Country Club. And so he and I were friends through that. And like I said, he and I were playing together with Jimmy and Jeff and all of them for the Courthouse Project. Phil, I'd known Phil for a long time. Phil had played in bands, and like I said, my older brother Matt was in bands, and Phil, actually, you know what? I remember Phil used to come over to my house around Christmas time a lot, because my brother Matt, Tim McCanna, my little brother Jeff, and Phil would play music together a lot. And I remember us having Christmas parties where Phil would be playing the drums and all that sort of stuff, and so he was always around. I knew Phil for a while through all of that. And I guess everybody just kind of friends and knew each other. And I think Johnny knew Phil, through the whole kind of churchy world a little bit. But I will say that, the idea that Phil and Johnny and Dean, started playing, I'm trying to remember the exact moment, because I recall at one point, Dean was like, "Hey, I'm going to go play with these guys." And I was like, "Well, why are you going to do that?" And then they're like, "Well, why don't you come play with these? Why don't we all go play with these guys?" And then that just kind of happened. You know what I mean? It was like, all right, fine, I'll go play with these guys a couple days. And as we started jamming and realizing that was a much better chemistry, and I don't know, I think maybe Jimmy was a little unhappy with that, but that's kind of what happened.
Talk to me a little bit about what those early practices were like, what the first song was, what the early days when you guys were like, all right, we're the Sky Kings, because that was the first incarnation. What was that like?
I don't know if I remember specifically what songs we came up with first. I remember being in Phil's basement, and I remember that we even called it the Beehive because we found some old foam that had a honeycomb pattern, and we put it all up around this like 10 by 10 room in an unfinished basement of his house, and that's where we played. And, you know, it was loud and knobby and all that sort of stuff. But I will say that we clicked really well. You know what I mean? And that really helped. And I think a lot of it too, like, you know, in a lot of ways, I will say just me and Johnny Yeager always really, you know, because he played drums maybe more than most and better than most in the band. And I played bass and or keyboard most. And so as a result of that, like, he and I really clicked. You know what I mean? From a playing point of view and personally, but you know what I mean? Playing with Johnny made me be like, oh shit, this is what it's like. You know what I mean? So like, that's what I remember. I felt really satisfied in that this was like hitting. And of course, everybody else was great. Phil's voice is outstanding. You know, Dean and I got along like thieves. So I think that's what it was. It was just that feeling of, you know what, this is fun. This is what I want to be spending my time doing. And I think that was the feeling. And like I was saying before, I didn't really know what the hell I wanted to be in life, what I wanted to do. I kind of was a dilettante, bounced around. But then in that moment, I felt like, okay, this is something that I feel like we're doing that's worth my time and attention.
Obviously, when you get to that point where you know you got a nucleus, you want that first show. What was the first show like? How did you get it?
Oh, man. Did anybody tell you what the first show was? What did Johnny say our first show was?
Yeah, and that's the best recollection that I got. Johnny said that you guys played on the square, and you had to branch it out to 2 shows because there were so many people there.
Where did he say it was?
He said it was on the square in Liberty.
Was it?
It was some coffee shop.
Oh, at a coffee shop on the square in Liberty? I'm willing to take his word for it. I don't even know if I remember that.
I don't, and he brought it up. He was like, you may not have even been there. It was like something that was kind of shotgun, and you guys were like, all right, let's do it. And so many people showed up. He said it was after a fall festival, or it was around that time, and you guys put flyers up all over the square, and a lot of people found out about it, and it turned into a big crowd, and you guys literally had to split it up into 2 sets because there were so many people.
That seems, I know that shit like that happened to us, and so, I mean, I'm willing to take his word for it that was our first show. My memories of I have some memories, I mean, mind you, my memory is not great. Some of my memories of those early shows, I remember, let's see, there's the 2 early shows that I remember, and I know these were by no means our first shows. I remember playing a show at a place called Governor Stumpy's down in Waldo. And I remember that because we started playing and the owner started screaming that we were too loud, and he like kicked us off stage, and we're like, screw this guy, but all of our shit's still up on stage. And then we went back up like an hour or 2 later once like the dinner rush was over, and we played again, and he was like, this is awesome, you guys need to come back, and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, you know what? No. you're kind of a dick, and we would have just... But then the one, actually, I'll tell you a good one. The one that I remember most of, like, I remember that Phil got us a show, and there was this, you know that church, there's like a church in Midtown that in the basement they had like a music venue, and it was, Phil knew, I can't even remember what the hell it was called, and Phil knew them because obviously his band before the Daybirds, he was in a Christian band, and so he had connections in that world. He booked a show, and we were like, okay, this is going to be great. So we go in there, and this is actually, you know what, this is when we'd made our recording of the Sky Kings record, and so we had CDs pressed for that for sale. We're like, okay, this is a good show. We booked it through some legitimate means. So we get up there, we play the show, it's us, and we're opening for some Christian band called Tim Suttle and the Satellite Soul. I remember that. So we get up there, the place is packed. Packed with our friends. I mean, probably a few hundred at least kids in there. We play, they go crazy, they love it. Bunch of people buy our records. The place empties out down to about a third left for Tim Suttle. So as the show ends, I remember going up to the guy to get paid, and he was like, oh, well, we've decided to donate the door to Tim Suttle to continue his ministry. And And I remember me and Dean were like, here, it's kind of loud. Come talk to us over here about this. So there was this little game closet that under the church, right, where it was like kind of like a big walk-in closet room that was full of board games. So we walk in there with this guy, and we shut the door, and me and Dean stand with our backs to the door, right, on purpose. And so we're like, explain this to us again. And he was like, well, you guys are just getting your start, but he's out there spreading the word and blah, 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 blah. And in a nutshell, we were like, I don't think you understand, right? We brought these people in here. We made this shit happen. That is our money. You aren't giving it to anybody. We're not leaving here without this money. And he's like, well, that's not very Christian, and that's not where. And I'm like, I don't give a shit. You're not getting out of this room until we get our money. And he was like, you fucking, and he did. And he was like, you'll never play here again. And I was like, I promise you that's not going to be a problem because we're never going to fucking play this shithole again, period. And that, I think that was the first and last show that that Phil ever booked. You know? Yeah, exactly. Or put another way, it's like, Phil, if you got to lead on a show, let's circle the wagons on the money deal before we drive anywhere. Because but I remember that one, man. That was some chicanery.
All of these stories I remember vaguely. So, you know, the one thing early on, when did you guys know you had the magic? When did you feel like we got this?
I mean, like, in some regard, like I was saying, like pretty early when we kind of first got together and started making music together, it was just so easy. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. I mean, man, so much of life is hard. But when things come really easy, and when those easy things are good, and people respond to how much they like them, like that's an intoxicating feeling. You know what I mean? And so to just be in a situation where, you know, whatever, Johnny comes over to my place, we're sitting on the patio, we are just farting around, and we come up with some riff, and it's like, holy shit, that's a great riff. And then whoever's around us is like, oh my God, that's great. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, that little dopamine push, you keep going for it. So I think we felt that early on, or else we probably wouldn't even let the momentum roll forward.
So give me an idea of a timeline. I kind of did this with Johnny at one point. So you guys, from his recollection, met around 97, and I'm trying to stitch together the albums. So, you know, you had the Sky Kings EP, Turnstile, and then You Rock. So kind of give me, from your recollection, when you guys hooked up and kind of the album discography, so to speak.
Well, let's see. We made that Sky Kings album in, I want to see, I think 97 makes sense. We recorded the Turnstile album, that was 1999. I'm almost sure of that. And then You Rock, I think that one came out in like 01, I think is the way it works. And we recorded tons of stuff in between, but that's how it all laid out. But I think we probably started getting together around 96 is when I would probably say the summer of 96 is when all of that first stuff kind of came down, when it first started happening.
The Sky Kings, you guys were taking off. Things were going good. You get a letter in the mail. Some countries act is named the same thing. Talk to me about that transition from the cease and desist to the birth of the name Daybirds.
See, now I can't remember specifically if it was a cease and desist. If somebody said that could be the case. I also knew that there was, yeah, you know what? You're right. There was some reason. There was some reason for that. Shit. You're right. I remember us looking for a name, and as far as my memory serves, I want to say that Dean was looking in a book, just sort of like looking around, and there was a couple sentences, and the word day and then the word bird was on the next line, kind of right up and down from each other. And he just kind of glanced at it and saw day and then bird underneath it, and just was like, oh, what about Daybirds? And of the things we were kind of talking about, we're like, yeah, that'll work. You know what I mean? So not incredibly, I guess, meaningful, or the meaning got backfilled to it or whatever. But that was, if I'm not that, but so far as I know, that's the truth. I know that Dean came up with it. I believe he came up with it by reading it like that. And we were like, yeah, that'll work.
So as the band went on, you guys obviously evolved into your roles. You got better and more comfortable with each other. When would you say, and you guys were really hitting the circuit hard here in Kansas City, going out on the road, when would you say you were at the height of your powers as a band, really like songwriting, touring, everything was clicking? You guys were like, holy shit.
Yeah, I would say that was around maybe like 2001-ish is probably 01, 02. I remember that's about the time where we would go out on the road and we would like consistently fill clubs everywhere we went. We would have, that would be like, okay, this weekend we're going to go play Chicago Friday night and Saturday night. We would play a club like, like Shuba's or something like that. And it would be our show, right? Like we're the headliner of the show. It's 2 nights, right? So fill the club both nights for us. Maybe on the way up, hit like some like University of North Iowa or something like that. Then the next weekend, let's go then up to Milwaukee through Milwaukee. Then the next weekend up through Omaha. The next weekend down through like Columbia, St. Louis. And you can just do these big loops out from Kansas City where you're playing very consistently like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And it's your show every night. You're the headliner every night. The house is full every night. And then additionally be playing some, even bigger shows here and there, whether it's opening for somebody that's, quite large and then, I think around that time too, like we played Spirit Fest and we were like the last support before Huey Lewis, right? So like we shared a trailer with Huey Lewis, and when you're on the stage at Spirit Fest, there's like 20,000 people or more out there in front, you know what I mean? And like Day on the Hill in Lawrence with, 7,000 people and playing these shows like that, where it's not like, oh, we're the first band on. We went on at 3 in the afternoon. It's like, no, it's after dark. We're one of the last few bands to play these big shows. That was cool, and then, college shows up around places like that. And so that's where it became when we started playing shows where it was consistently several hundred to thousands of people, on the reg.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then that obviously is a precursor to, and here comes in Dennis Rodriguez. And I'm curious, how did that relationship build and become something bigger and bigger with him? What was that relationship like?
Well, I'm sure that Cato told you probably about, how Dennis came into the world, right? Yeah. So
yeah.
I always liked Dennis a lot. I still like Dennis a lot. I just haven't talked to him in a long time. Dennis was always a kind of a voice of wisdom, and he at the very least understood the world as it was. You know what I mean? Now, granted, that didn't necessarily take into account the world that it turned into, because the model with which Dennis really made sense was like the old records and radios model, right? Like the idea that you release a single and you distribute that single through, radio stations, and, the methodology by which bands became popular in the 90s and early 2000s is very different from like the 2000s on, in the era of social media and the era of streaming services and everything that's come after that, right? So in that sense, our relationship with him and the goal that we were trying to achieve was very much based on that sort of old model. And obviously the Celine Dion agency were huge players in that, right? And so it was a choice. It was a decision to say that, like, okay, here is an approach by which we can achieve success. And ultimately, part of what caused it to fail was that, the problem with that model is that very few people have concentrated power. You know what I mean? And so basically at the end of the day, if one guy is like, nope, we're not picking up that project, you've lost a lot, right? And which, compare that to like, whatever, like a Billie Eilish or somebody today who, in this environment of 2022 or whatever, develops a music career. It's different. You know what I mean? They have different strengths. They have different means to different ends that just didn't exist. I mean, shit. Back then, we were right on the cusp of, you could reasonably record a good album in through relatively inexpensive means, but you still had to produce a shitload of actual physical media to sell, right? People don't think about that, but if you start a band today, you know, Billie Eilish, I mentioned her again. I mean, she recorded her first album on a MacBook in her brother's bedroom, right? And then all the distribution is digital. Back, you know, whatever it was, 20 years ago, you had to go into an actual studio. You had to book studio time, and at the end of the day, you had to come out of pocket, frankly, couple grand at minimum to physically print the merchandise that you have to buck around and sell, you know. So that's what I mean about the old method and the new method. And the old method was very heavily capital intensive. And in order for us to engage in a capital intensive realm, we needed somebody like Dennis and by extension Celine Dion and them to help us make that happen because of just the era we were in. I realize I ended that question quite a ways, I think, maybe from where it started.
No, that's good. No, that's good. You nailed it. So let me leapfrog a little bit here and ask you, you know, you guys went to Montreal, you guys went to LA, you guys went to Vegas. What were those trips like? How much growth happened during those trips?
Tons. I mean, those are some truly amazing experiences. And I mean, that was just, it really felt good to be, it felt great to feel like you were who you were in your skin in that moment. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't feel like I was playing or pretending. And I mean it like this. How many times, you know, somebody that's like, I'm in a band. Okay, you're in a band, but what are you really? It's like, oh, well, I'm actually an accountant. Me and my buddies play music, and then every Thursday night we do an open mic. Okay, that's, you know, that's one thing. But that's not the same thing as like, oh, I'm an athlete. Well, what does that mean? I play soccer with my buddies on Thursday nights after work. No, you have a uniform, you have a paycheck, you are on a team with fans in the crowd. Now you're an athlete, you know? And so I think those experiences felt genuine in that regard. Because, man, when you are in a recording studio in some faraway place, and that is what you're getting paid to do, and you are getting, you know, whatever, it's like, it felt so real, and it felt so good. And there's so many experiences from those, like little snapshots that I will absolutely never forget. And here I'll point out a couple, you know, keep them in, cut them out of the file, whatever, but I'll tell you a couple of what I mean. One day when we were in Montreal, we had to do piano stuff, right? So when we were tracking the piano, we had one studio called Divan Vert, I think it was, or Studio Piccolo, something like this, is where we were recording. And so we did a lot of our vocals there, we did our guitars there, or whatever. But when it came time to do the piano tracks, we went to a different studio. Now, the studio that we went to for that was the largest recording space in Montreal. It was a huge brick room, and brick sounds weird, but this is where they recorded like huge like choral vocal performances and stuff like that. And I guess Celine had recorded many of her records there. So we go to this place, and we go there, and it's stunning inside there. It's so cool. And there is a 10-foot Steinway concert grand in the middle of this room with this guy who's tuning it, right? For me. You know what I mean? That was outstanding, I don't know, gave me goosebumps. Like, here I am, like, who the hell am I? But I'm walking into this room. It's the biggest room in the city. It's absolutely beautiful. This outstanding instrument sitting in the middle of this room that has all been expertly mic'd, and now 20 minutes before I play it, this old man is over there tuning it so it's perfect. You know what I mean? Like, that just hit me. And then when I went out there, they're like, test the thing. And I'm like, yeah, I was just playing the shit out of that piano, hitting it like crazy. It sounded so good. It felt so good. It felt just an amazing moment to be in. And one other one, back at that other studio, I remember at one point we were tracking some guitar stuff. And, well, I was tracking one of my guitar parts. So in Montreal, like, at least on the east side, it's like kind of old school, like that's the French side of town, where like none of the buildings are taller than the church spires, you know? So the studio had these sort of long windows, like the kind of short but long horizontally. So I'm looking out over the eastern side of Montreal, and there's like a light snow falling. So it's like all these old buildings and church spires and a light snow falling. And I've got my cans on, and I'm tracking my guitar part, just staring out this window, you know? Like, it just, I'm to this day, I can see that snapshot perfectly in my head of just, you know, that's what I did. Whatever. Tuesday afternoon, John goes to work. What you doing? Standing here, looking at this absolutely outstanding scene, recording my guitar line. It just felt amazing.
Yeah, dream realized, dude. Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, yeah, and so let me get to the part, because Montreal is a part of this. When you all were on a conference call, you guys are obviously all in this place where you're ready for the next step. And what happened? What do you remember from that moment? And how did everything kind of progress after that happened?
Well, if you're talking about like the death knell, as it were, basically it came down to the agency had X amount of resources that, you know, they were devoting to new projects or whatever. And obviously Dennis had us, and it all appeared that it was a go. Renee liked it. Renee being Renee Angelou, Celine Dion's husband. Who was the boss, and like he was on board, everything was great. And apparently someone else within that organization had gotten in his ear, because this guy had like a female pop artist that he was developing, right? So this guy has a female pop artist, Dennis has this band, us, and then I'm sure others. So for whatever reason, guy with the girl singer essentially convinced Renee that, look, we shouldn't waste our time and energy on this rock band because that's outside of our strength, right? Celine, girl pop, it all makes sense. Put our resources behind my project, forget Dennis's project, right? So the guy was successful. Renee was like, you're right. Okay, fine. We're going with your project. Dennis is not there anymore. And there you go. So that was a crush to momentum. Now, obviously, there's other factors as well, which is like, okay, well, so what? So why did that mean that the band had to go away? Well, in the lead up to that, we all had our sights set on the idea that, okay, this is the next step. We have all this stuff we've been working on, all these songs that we were in progress. The next step is that we're going back into the studio, probably back up to Montreal, and we're going to cut this album, and it's going to get released on like a big label. However, so then in the lead up to that, though, I think the rift that formed in the band was the desire not to go out on the road anymore. And I know that Dean was especially of this mindset where, I don't know, for whatever reason, where he was in his life, like the idea of playing all these shows didn't really appeal to him as much. He wanted to be in the studio. I think that was the side of it that he really enjoyed, you know what I mean? Like, he liked the idea of being a craftsman in the studio, etc. And, to the extent that mindset carried the day, we didn't go on the road for a long time. Like, for the last little while, we hardly played shows because we were at John Evans's house doing the finals on all of these tracks that we were going to record. And my opinion was that I didn't like that. I thought it was foolhardy to come off the road because I knew it was going to kill our momentum. Because I was like, look, guys, if something goes awry with this deal, we have put ourselves in a terrible spot, right? Because we're going to have to rebuild. My attitude is, why lose any ground? Let's keep going on this front. And I think a lot of them were just, we don't want to, and granted, I'm sure their reasons were good and valid to them. So no fault as it may. But then as a result, once it came out that it was like, yeah, this deal fell through. It's like, well, this deal fell through and we're sitting here with nothing. We haven't played in a long time. You know what I mean? Like, it's like our momentum had all dried up and it just didn't feel, I don't know. It felt bad. It felt like this isn't, we really shot ourselves in the foot. And I mean, hell, I'm sure I had a lot to do with us ultimately breaking up because it was like, to some extent, I'm sure it was like, if you would have listened to me, you know what I mean? But then, if you didn't listen to me on such an important thing, then what's the point moving forward, right? Because then what, so.
Well, yeah, and that leads me right into my next question, because you had mentioned being with John Evans and recording, and John had already talked to me about that. So there was this period after the decision where you all had to regroup, which you've kind of elaborated on, but there was Phil came out of the band, John Evans came in. Talk to me about that transition and how that phase of the band worked.
I'm trying to remember how. What I can't tell you, release without. What I can't tell you is like, okay, Phil left the band around X date, and then John was with us for X number of whatever it was, month to year plus, and but it's something like that. But towards the end of it there, my recollection of all of it was that Phil was becoming sort of increasingly erratic. I love Phil, but and he'll, I'm sure, will be the first to tell you that he can be like a real kind of scattered guy, and that just became untenable. Because when you're in a band, it's like you're married to three other dudes. You know what I mean? Truly. So you're in this relationship that is like, it's more than just being a friend, because now you have a lot invested in each other, right? Like emotionally, financially, your future, all of that. And I think that like we all kind of reached a point to where it just Phil wasn't really on the same trajectory. And I guess in his defense, like as the band was coming to an end, we were all sort of had different mindsets and different trajectories and all this sort of thing. But it just kind of reached a point where Phil just, he would be unreliable. It wouldn't show up to shit. He wouldn't be on time. It would be, you know what I mean? And it was just like, we can't keep going like this. And, John had been, recording us for a long time. He was in other bands around town. We all knew each other really well. He brought his own thing to the table. He could sing, he could play a lot of instruments, so that was great. And John's a great dude. And so, when he came into the band, it definitely, it was different. It wasn't different bad or different good. You know what I mean? It was like, well, not very good. How should I say that? He brought his own thing into the band, and his own thing was great. So it, I think, collectively added to what we were doing. But there again, John was also of that ilk of like, this is the recipe here. We need to focus on this pre-recording and this album deal and all of these kinds of things. And he was obviously a part of the camp that voted for that to happen. I honestly think, if I had to guess, Johnny was probably in the middle. Dean and John definitely didn't want to be out on the road and wanted to just worry about recordings and that sort of stuff. I wanted to be out on the road. Johnny was kind of in the middle. And I'm sure that a lot of that has to do with, like, I was fortunate. I was working out of the Kitahara's photography studio at the time. So, like, I was able to earn enough money to, keep my apartment and all that sort of stuff with minimal effort. It wasn't like I had to show up to a day job every day of the week. And I can appreciate that for, Dean and John Evans, like, it was probably a lot harder to be in a band and say, okay, the money we're making is mostly getting reinvested. I mean, the way it worked is we reinvested the money the band made, and then, of course, it would pay for, like, our per diems and our life while we were on the road. So it didn't cost us any extra to be in the band, and it stabilized itself, but the band didn't necessarily make enough money to also cover all of our rents and expenses and, day life. And so I get that shit costs money. So I get that those guys were probably the mindset that, we can't, we're going to have to either record deal or bust here. You know what I mean? And I didn't think that was, where we were at. But yeah.
No. That's it. That's getting to the methodology of it. No, that's perfect. So let's get to what was the last meeting?
What was the time that you guys said, I think we all need to move on and go on with our lives?
I honestly can't even say. I know the last most distinct memory of all of that I have was that house that I lived over by UMKC, and talking with Dennis on the porch about it. And then from that point forward, fuck man, honestly, I don't know. I wonder if the other guys have a better memory of it. I don't really even necessarily remember having some like last meeting with the band. I can't even remember our mindset. Were we all mad at each other? Was it we were all just sad?
Right. Well, I haven't gotten a definitive from anybody. I've gotten more of the feeling of what was going on at that time. I think it was more of, it wasn't about, like, if you're reading a book, it's not about the timeline. It's more about the theme. Like, what was the feeling? What was, because everybody was obviously at a point, you know, where it was time to move on from what you were doing. So,
yeah. Well, actually, you know, that's an interesting way to look at it, right? Because, and I think that's fair to say that, like, you don't, like, I can't, like, here's an example. Like, I can't tell you with any certainty the last time I ate a taco. I'm sure it was in the past month or so. But when I was eating that, taco, I was like, I need to remember this as the last taco I eat. It doesn't work like that, right? You just haven't done it since, right? So with the band, I'm sure that at some point we were just like, all right, guys, well, listen. All right, we're not going to meet up this week. We'll just talk about it later. You know what I mean? And then later drags on. And it's like, what are we going to do? You know what I mean? I don't know. I'll deal with it. We'll get to that. You know what I mean? And the next thing you know, you've gone farther down that road.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. And that's kind of what I'm going for. And that's what I'm kind of, my general feelings then. But, you know, if you condense and take everything that we've talked about with the band's history, we've gone from the very beginning to the very end at this point. If you lean back in the easy chair and just think about the legacy of the Daybirds, what do you think about? What do you think the legacy of the Daybirds is?
I think that we were, I think we were of the wrong time. I think we were in the wrong time. And I mean that in both good and bad. I think that part of what made people enjoy us is that how we sounded was, you know, it wasn't what everything else sounded like at the time. You know, it was good music with all the harmonies, and the way that we wrote music was like, in one sense, it was reminiscent of whether it's old 60s music or whatever, but on the other hand, it was very much, you know, more modern and complex than whatever, like the Strokes or whatever was out and happening at the time. So in that sense, we didn't really sound like everything else that was happening, right? So in that sense, we were not of the right time. And then, like I said, like I alluded to before, like, our band came into being at a very unusual time in the world of the entertainment industry. You know what I mean? Yeah. And in retrospect, like, I mean, hell, if I had a crystal ball, I mean, of course, everybody would think that, right? If only I had a crystal ball, I could go back in time.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I can see where some of my instincts were accurate, where some of them weren't. And I think that that's just it. We were in a weird time. Our music didn't match the time in a way that was good because people enjoyed it because it didn't sound like everything else, but it was bad because it wasn't as immediately marketable in well-developed channels. And because of the timing, well-developed channels is all that existed. The opportunity to sort of create it yourself was just beginning, but not quite there, you know? And so that was weird. It was like, man, I would have loved to say, well, instead of being a band from 97 to 2006, like, man, if it was 2007 to 2016, you know, it would have been different.
You know, we've all become the Ben Folds lyric where we've all grown up and we've all gone separate ways. We're becoming older men. But when you think back to that time, what do you miss the most? When you think Daybirds, What's the thing that you miss the most immediately?
Shit, I don't know. I mean, because I don't miss it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It was a very great time of my life, and I'm grateful for it. I mean, shit, let's put it this way. I mean, I remember, like, Dean and I would spend so much time together. And I remember one of the last times I talked to him on the reg was that, like, we both kind of were like, hey, you know what, man? I've already spent more than a lifetime with you. You know what I mean? Like, think about your friend, right? As average listener, like, think about how much time you spend with your best friend, right? Well, when you are in a band together with that person, you are, you know, it is time, God knows how much, right? You're day in, day out, every single day. You see that person so damn much, and same goes for all those guys. We were just together for so much that we spent 30 years together in those, whatever, 8-9 years. So yeah. I don't regret it because we had very full, and I don't miss them, and I don't, you know, whenever I see any of those guys, it's like, hey, we're right back at it. You know what I mean? Like, they will always and forever be a part of my life. I don't miss anything about, I do. I mean, I liked playing shows. Playing shows is super fun. I like being on stage. But there again, I mean, I have every opportunity in the world to be on a stage now, and I don't take it because, again, I felt fulfilled by that experience. So I miss the missed opportunity. Let's put it that way. Yeah. If the one thing that bugs me is, like I said, everything, and I keep kind of bringing up those things where I keep alluding to the timing being wrong and the nature of the, I mean, like I said, I've been in the entertainment industry ever since this whole time, right? So I understand it with a hell of a lot more clarity now than I did when I was 21. So, you know, that's the thing that I quote unquote miss. I miss what I missed from not knowing, but, you know, such is youth.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So let's say a month from now, you get a phone call, random phone call. You're not sure who it's from. You pick it up and someone says, I want the Daybirds to get on stage again. What are you going to say to them?
Well, I've gotten calls like that before, and my answer is no. You know, what's done is done.
Let me ask you this. With that door being closed, what about the music catalog? Have you ever thought about getting, because at this point right now, because of where you were at, pre-digital and all of that, have you thought about getting something together to cement that audio legacy of the Daybirds, Sky Kings, so people can pick and pluck at it whenever they want?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was going to put it all on Spotify not long ago. I had a friend who was going to be able to help me do it to bypass just some of the expense and all of that. And that opportunity is no longer right in front of me. I figure I will at some point. I figure that when I get around to it, because I mean, like I said, I would put it on Spotify or some shit like that, because I obviously, you know, let whoever wants to listen to it, stream it and listen to it. Not because I feel like, oh, it's going to be monetized for some great amount of money. But yeah, I don't disagree with you. I just, there's just a degree of hassle to getting it set up. And I want to, I would rather just turn it over to somebody and be like, here's what you do. And then also too, there is some kind of missing pieces, right? Like I have like physical copies of the albums, I think, tucked in my closet in my office here. And then there was a bunch of recordings, like from when we were in Vegas. There's recordings from John Evans. Like there is a variety of recordings, and they are not necessarily all together, you know? So I think whenever I get thinking about that, I'm like, hey, all right, well, I want to do this, but first let me get it all together. But then I kind of like, I don't have the time or energy to get it all together, and then that idea gets moved along. And then also, I'm just a busy man in general, so I don't necessarily have a ton of time to do that.
Speaking of, so let's take that line, that pencil line, and move it down the line. Right now, we kind of mentioned you're in the entertainment industry, you're in Vegas. Tell me what you're doing right now, and do you play music? What's going on in your world?
I am a promoter right now. The company is called Bender Presents, and The main thing that we do is a festival called the Big Blues Bender, which is like essentially like a resort takeover. So we'll take like a Las Vegas resort, and we'll take the stages that exist, plus we'll construct other stages, whether they be indoor stages out by pool decks, and we'll buy up a shitload of hotel rooms, and we'll sell it as a package, right? Like come here, pay X amount, hotel room for 4 days, this big festival going on. And so for this company, we do that. We had a bluegrass one before COVID, which has yet to come back, but we hope will come soon. And for that, I am the president and COO of this company that puts on these events. And prior to that, the last 15 years, I was doing something similar down in the Caribbean for mostly in conjunction with a company called Cloud9, with things like Jam Cruise and other big events with, Widespread Panic, you name it, where similarly, like the whole hotel, vacation, buyout, all-inclusive entertainment, concert experience, like that's basically what I've been doing ever since the end of the Daybirds. So when the Daybirds ended, I kind of piddled around doing some stuff for a couple of years, and then for maybe the next 15 years, I spent doing that down and around, the Caribbean. And then about 5 years ago, I moved out here to essentially run this company in Vegas that does that does events along that platform. So that's what I do all day. If I was 20 years old today, you know what I mean, and trying to make a name for myself in the music business as an artist, like, you know what I mean? It's different. Like, it's so much, I don't know if it's better or, well, let's put it this way. There's more opportunity for more people. I remember even doing all those years in the Caribbean with these bands, and a lot of them were in the jam scene, you know what I mean? And here's, I think, the main difference. I have worked with a lot of bands to where it's like, okay, these are the kind of bands where the individual members of the band will probably, at the end of the year, see somewhere between whatever, $60,000 and $180,000 a year a piece for like 4 guys or whatever, right? So that's great. You know what I mean? That's a great life for a musician, blah, blah, blah. The old way was that, okay, as a musician, you're either broke or you're making $600,000 a year, plus. You know what I'm saying? So in that sense, the way the modern world works is there's a lot more opportunity. It's also a lot less likely, you know what I mean? There are fewer, big stars. If you think about less people are going to walk out of there with like hundreds of millions of dollars, but more people are going to walk out of there with a good life and a good wage. And that just has to do with how things are monetized, how opportunity is distributed these days. And that is, like I said, I would have loved that reality. I would have loved the reality where it's like, yeah, hey, I'm a touring musician. I make whatever, I make a good, comfortable living, and this is my life, being out on the road. But you know what? In the late 90s, it wasn't, that was a lot more rare. It was a lot easier. It was more like, hey, everybody buy your lottery ticket, if you are, but not even a lottery that's fair. Not even a lottery that's necessarily decided by the ticket holders. It's like, if the people in the suits decide that they can make money off of you, this is going to go somewhere. And you know what? It worked until it didn't. So what are you going to do?
That's it. And that's a part of the story and the narrative too. It's all about timing. You guys would have never known at the time, but I know how hard you guys were pushing on MP3 to get, one of your songs to get enough hits. So you guys were on the cusp of that, but who knows? I even posed that to Dennis, and he's like, yeah, you could say things would be different during this age, but it's still a perfect storm. No matter what you are, whatever you're doing, that one thing is not going to be it. It has to be all this shit. And we're old enough men to have seen enough to know that. There's not going to be a magic bullet theory. So
and that, which by the way, that again is part of why I think when it ended, I know that for my sake, when I knew I was done, was because I would put it squarely on the decision to basically stop touring and just go into the studio, because, like I said, in my mind, the idea was you've got to be hitting on all of these cylinders. You've got to be, you have to diversify your attack, because if you put it all into one basket like that, where it's like, okay, now we're gambling our entire future on this decision to go cut the record in this timeline. And then when that fell through, that's part of why I was like, well, shit, this isn't gonna help. This isn't gonna end right.
Yeah. No, I get it. And that's the interesting thing that that I see here, is that everybody has everybody has a plan. Everybody has a different way, and that's the reason why it's hard to keep bands together. Everybody has their own way of how things are going to work out, and the successful bands find a way to get through that. And it's not that unsuccessful bands don't. It's just that, especially with bands and artists, you have powerful personalities, and they all have to coexist together. Yeah. And it's not that one idea is wrong and one idea is right, like you've already mentioned. It's that what mix of the ideas are going to work, and you don't have a fucking manual that's going to say this shit's going to work, this isn't going to work. You have to do what's best for you. And obviously, like you were saying, you had a different work situation than the other guys did. So many fucking factors go into that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, yeah,
exactly.
You did the fucking best that you guys could, with the possibility of almost getting to that fucking point.
Sure. And, and it's like, and that's the thing where it's like, I'm not embarrassed about it. I don't feel like we failed. But then, again, you also see it's like, people, there's the thing you notice where in America, it's more often common that an individual is a band, where, I mean, I have to say, it's like, you think American music, right? That's like Elvis Presley, Bruce Springsteen. Like, there's a singularity to it, as opposed to like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, or is it like Michael Jackson? Like, there's maybe sometimes there's a bit of a reason for that, right? Where for whatever reason in America, it kind of needs to be a single person's vision and decision. You know what I mean? For it to happen. Yeah. Because, and I don't know why. I don't know if somebody can unpack that. Whether it's the socioeconomics of our country, whether it's its size, who knows what. But for whatever reason, like partially, like in those days, none of us could have just said, this is how we're doing it, guys. You know what I mean? There wasn't. So even though I felt like I knew what was best, and I'm sure everybody else felt like they knew what was best. Yeah. You know what I mean? But it wasn't like by fiat, one person could say. But, truth be told, at least in this country, the ability to make those decisions unilaterally make it easier to succeed.
Johnny, this was awesome, dude. So more to come. Thanks, Johnny.
Talk to you later. Yeah, later.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, brought to you by the 110-250 Audio Studio, where we give you a fresh and comprehensive insight into the finest musicians in the world. Thanks to Jon Sweetwood for his full story. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on both iTunes and Spotify. Swing by the Neon Jazz channel on YouTube, and for all things relatable or forgotten, jump over to joedimino.com. Until next time, enjoy the music out there.
What's this, a daybird? A young bird? Who's the bird? Where is he?